Hey, welcome back to the second episode of my Unity Devlog series. Today I'm mainly going to be working on some user interface, including a main menu, pause menu, some in-level UI elements, and the level selection and completion workflow. First off, I want there to be a speed element to the game, so I started off by making a timer. The UI element itself is simply a TextMesh object, and then there's some logic which sits within the torch script to start the timer once the player makes their first move. To control a lot of what goes on within levels and also tie a lot of the UI elements together, this level manager singleton will persist through scenes. By the time I'd implemented all the features in this video, it was already becoming a bit of a god class, so I'm in half a mind to break it down and give it a bit more refined responsibility going forwards. Similar to the torch, the goal script will also call a method within level manager to stop the timer once all fires in the level have been lit. The timer itself just uses the time.deltaTime attribute to increment the counter while active within update. You can see the timer in action here, not starting until the first move, and then eventually stopping once the player collides with the final, and in this case only, goal object while still lit. Next off, we're going to create the main menu. Let's get the boring and slightly painful stuff out of the way first, making the actual interactable elements through Unity's UI system and then scripting all the logic to link everything up. Now just to note, some of the UI elements here, such as the sliders, buttons, drop-downs and the checkbox, are part of an asset called Modern UI, which I happen to own before starting this project. As I already owned it, I figured I might as well use it as it's much more aesthetic than Unity's default and it's also nice and easy to use, but I'm not 100% sure if it goes with the overall look of how I'm picturing the game turning out, so this will probably change down the line. Either way, I'll leave a link in the description if you wanted to check that asset out. To start with, there's 3 simple text elements for play, settings and quit. And each of these have on-click events which hook up to some very simple methods in the main menu script. You can see those modern UI elements that I mentioned here in the settings menu. I've not implemented any audio for the game yet, so those 2 sliders don't actually affect anything for now, but are in place and ready for when I want to get started on that. These elements then link back up to the settings menu script. The only thing of complexity here is that we fetch the resolutions available to the user on awake to populate the drop-down with. It's not particularly interesting, I won't expand much further than that, but feel free to pause and take a look for yourself. Next we can move on to the level select screen. In terms of the elements themselves, there's just a heading, a panel and a back button. The actual population of the levels into the menu is done dynamically. On awake, in the level menu script, we call the getLevels method, which, as you might guess, grabs all of the levels. It does this by looping through all scenes that are included in the build, and every level will follow a standard naming convention of world number dot level number. So, for example, the 3 levels I built in the last episode are named 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. We then attempt to split the name of the scene into a level object, separating out the world and level numbers, and if successful, we add that object to the list of levels for storage. If unsuccessful, like if it was the main menu scene for example, it just doesn't get added to the list. When the resultant list is returned back to the level menu script, we then loop over all of these and instantiate a level panel UI prefab into the panel that we saw before. This prefab has a typical star rating for the player to achieve based on their time and possibly through collectibles, and then the labels for the level number and the time taken to complete. The start level method simply calls a scene fader and fades to whatever the name of the scene is. Right, thank you for surviving that. It's now time to move on to something that's hopefully a bit more exciting, which is making the main menu a bit more visually interesting. I decided to venture into shaders for the first time through the use of the universal render pipeline and shader graph. The image I've got in my mind for the main menu is to have our torch over to one side of the screen, just barely avoiding getting rained on, with some water reflection off the ground and some overly dramatic lighting. Having zero idea what I was doing, I was rescued by two very useful YouTube videos I found explaining how to make a water reflection shader in shader graph, and links to those are in the description below. I'll scroll through the graph here so you can get a bit of an idea of what's going on, but if you'd like to learn about this in more depth, I'd really recommend checking those videos out. For some more context on how this is working in my scene, there's a secondary camera which captures a segment of the scene to be reflected. This then outputs to a texture which is passed into my shader graph. The shader graph is then dropped onto a material, which in turn is dropped onto just a basic square sprite game object, which altogether will allow the reflection to update in real time. I then managed to, with zero help, create this magnificent fire shader. Its sole purpose is to set the color intensity of each particle to be some number greater than 0. In this case, apparently I went with 4 point something. It's not very exciting in itself, but once I add some bloom to the post-processing stack, I'm hoping to get quite a nice glow around each particle. Finally, I added a few lights into the scene. 2 different global lights, one for the scene in general, so it's not pitch black, and another to light the rain to a slightly different intensity because it was difficult to find a nice balance with just one. There's also a point light on the torch around the fire. And now for the final product. I think it looks pretty good for a first effort. It will probably be tweaked in the future, but it's a good starting point. You can see the level selector in action also. Don't look too closely at the level it's loaded though. I haven't converted them to use the new URP yet or added any lighting to them, so let's sort that out now. While implementing the lighting, I wanted the light emitted from the fire sources to subtly flick to add to the atmosphere a little bit, which I think overall works quite well. I'm sure the lighting will be constantly tweaked throughout this project. For example, I'm already thinking it would be good if I could instead get the flame particles to emit the light instead of it just being a static point on the torch, but it's already a big improvement over what we had in the last episode. In terms of how the flickering works, while the torch is lit, every frame has a roughly 5% chance to cause a flicker. It then randomly chooses a number between -0.5 and 0.5 for the target intensity and calls a coroutine to fade to that intensity. We can also see the light fading out when the torch gets extinguished and back in when relit. These are also simple coroutines called on particle and source fire collision. The final bits to do today are the pause and level completion menus. These are super simple for now and very similar to the other menus implemented earlier in terms of how they work behind the scenes, so I won't go into them in too much depth. The pause menu can be brought up only during levels via the escape key and will set the timescale to 0 while it's active. The level completion menu pops up when all of the goals within the level have been completed. We've only got 1 in each for now, but this will allow for as many as we want per level. We just use the current index of the level in the list held by the manager to fade to either the same index on a restart or the subsequent index when we press the next level button. The next level fade is within a try catch, just in case this happens to be the last level that exists, in which case for now it will just transition back to the main menu. Right, that's all the work we'll be doing for this devlog. So having updated the other scenes with today's changes, we can now go ahead and create our first basic demo build of the game to run through end to end. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying the series, please do leave a like or a comment. It's good to know what people do and don't find interesting in these videos, and if there's any suggestions for either things you'd like to see or things that you think I should put in the game. Also, please don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to continue to follow the game as it progresses. I'm going to cautiously aim to stick to an episode once every couple weeks on average, depending on my workload during my day job. Next episode, I think I will be looking to implement saving so that levels can be unlocked as the player progresses and their times and ratings will actually be saved and persisted. I might also look to add in some collectibles to pick up throughout the levels. So thanks again, and I hope to catch you next time.